Commander Vexhai stood at the observation deck of Galactic Defense Station Omega-7, watching the small human ship dock with their massive orbital platform. The vessel looked ordinary compared to the sleek, crystalline cruisers and the bulky Talarian destroyers already stationed there, yet something about it made his forearms twitch nervously. The Devourers had been consuming entire star systems for 3 standard cycles now. Every species in the galaxy had lost worlds to the parasitic hive mind creatures. The latest reports showed them moving toward the core systems, leaving nothing but dead space behind them. Traditional weapons barely slowed them down. Conventional tactics failed completely. Then the humans had sent a message. They wanted to help. Commander, his aide Zefka approached, tablet in hand. The human delegation is ready for the briefing. Vexhai turned away from the viewport. What do we know about them? Not much. They come from a planet called Earth in the Outer Rim territories. They discovered faster than light travel only 200 cycles ago. Their technology is basic compared to ours. Then why are they here? Zefka's tentacles moved in what his species called a confusion pattern. Unknown, Commander. They claim they have experience fighting parasitic species. The briefing room was already crowded when Vexhai arrived. Representatives from 12 different species sat around the holographic display table. The air recyclers worked overtime to accommodate everyone's breathing requirements. At the far end of the table, 4 humans sat quietly. Their leader was a woman with gray hair pulled back severely. Her uniform was simple, dark blue with minimal decorations. Next to her sat a younger male, his posture relaxed but his eyes constantly moving around the room. The other 2 humans remained silent, studying everyone present. I am Admiral Park Jiwoo, the woman said when introductions began. Her voice was steady and calm. This is Captain Kim Taehyung, Lieutenant Choi Minji, and Sergeant Lee Doyun. The crystalline representative, Ambassador Kreltos, leaned forward. His diamond-like skin caught the light as he spoke. Admiral Park, we appreciate your offer of assistance, but we must ask, what experience does your species have with threats like the Devourers? Admiral Park's expression did not change. We have fought parasitic species before. We have also fought hive minds. We understand both types of enemy, but surely nothing on this scale, said General Horth of the Mechanical Union, his metal body whirred as he gestured to the holographic display showing Devourer-consumed systems. These creatures have destroyed civilizations that stood for millions of cycles. Captain Kim spoke for the first time. General, how long have your species been at peace before this invasion? The question caught everyone off guard. General Horth's optical sensors blinked. The Mechanical Union has not engaged in warfare for over 50,000 cycles. We achieved perfect social harmony long ago. And the crystallines? Kim asked. Ambassador Kreltos shifted uncomfortably. We have had no internal conflicts for 30,000 cycles. External wars ended even longer ago. Kim nodded and looked around the table. When was the last time any of your species fought a war where your survival was truly threatened? Silence filled the room. Vexhai realized he could not answer that question for the Talarian either. They had conflicts, border disputes, resource negotiations. But actual wars where entire civilizations faced extinction? Not for millennia. On Earth, Admiral Park said quietly, we have never stopped fighting such wars. We have faced extinction from disease, from climate change, from asteroid impacts from other species on our own planet, and from each other. We have fought parasites that tried to control our minds. We have fought hive-mind insects that consumed everything in their path. We have fought enemies that showed no mercy and expected none. She stood and walked to the holographic display. Show us the Devourer feeding process. The display shifted to surveillance footage from a consumed world. Vexhai had seen it before, but it still made his stomach twist. The Devourers swarmed over living beings, inserting feeding tubes and neural connectors. The victims remained conscious throughout the consumption process, their knowledge and memories being absorbed while their bodies were slowly dissolved. Most representatives looked away. Some left the room entirely. The humans watched without blinking. How long does the process take? Lieutenant Choi asked. From initial contact to complete consumption, approximately 6 standard hours, Vexhai replied, disturbed by the clinical tone of the question. Do they feel pain during consumption? Yes, the neural activity suggests extreme suffering throughout. Sergeant Lee spoke for the first time. Can the process be interrupted? What do you mean? If someone is being consumed, can they be saved? Vexhi's forearms moved in a negative gesture. No. Once the process begins, attempting to remove the feeding apparatus causes immediate death. It is considered a mercy killing at that point. The humans exchanged glances. Captain Kim made a note on his tablet. Admiral Park returned to her seat. Commander Vexhi, are you prepared for total warfare? The question was simple, but something in her tone made every being in the room pay attention. What do you mean by total warfare? I mean warfare where there are no civilians, where there is no safe place, where surrender means something worse than death, where every choice is between bad and worse, and where winning requires you to become something you never wanted to be. Vexhi felt his breathing apparatus work harder. Admiral, we are fighting for the survival of our species. Of course we are prepared for anything necessary. Admiral Park's smile was not comforting. Commander, with respect, you are not prepared. None of you are. You have lived in peace for so long that you have forgotten what war actually costs. She gestured to her team. We have never forgotten. On Earth, we have a saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. We have been preparing for this fight since we learned to sharpen sticks and throw rocks. General Horth's mechanical voice buzzed with static. Are you suggesting that your primitive background makes you better warriors than species with superior technology? Captain Kim answered. General, we are suggesting that our species has never stopped being warriors. You developed beyond the need for conflict. We never had that luxury. While you built paradise, we built better ways to survive hell. The room fell quiet again. Vexhi studied the four humans. They looked ordinary, even weak compared to some species present. But there was something in their eyes that made him uncomfortable. A coldness, a readiness. What do you propose? He asked finally. Admiral Park straightened. Full integration of human forces with the Galactic Defense Coalition. Joint training, shared tactical planning, and most importantly, you follow human doctrine when fighting the Devourers. What makes your doctrine different? Admiral Park's expression grew even more serious. Commander, when you fight an enemy that shows no mercy, you cannot afford to show any either. When you fight an enemy that will consume everything you love, you must be prepared to burn everything they might use against you. She paused, letting her words sink in. We will teach you how to win, but understand this. After fighting alongside humans, you may not recognize yourselves anymore. Victory against the Devourers requires becoming something your peaceful species have never been. Are you prepared for that horror? 3 weeks later, Vexhi found himself on asteroid base Tethys 9, watching something he had never imagined possible. The training facility buzzed with activity, as beings from 12 different species attempted to learn human military doctrine. It was not going well. No, no, no. Staff Sergeant Yoon Hana shouted at a group of crystalline warriors. You do not announce your attack. You do not give warning. You strike fast, hard, and without honor. The lead crystalline, a warrior named Stelvar, raised his diamond-hard arms in protest. Sergeant, honor demands that we face our enemies with dignity. A surprise attack is cowardly. Hana walked up to the 7-foot-tall crystal being without fear. Even though he could crush her with one hand, she stared up at him with cold confidence. Warrior Stelvar, do you have a family? Yes, my mate and 3 younglings wait for me on the homeworld. Good. When the Devourers come for them, you can explain to your younglings why honor was more important than their lives. She turned to address the entire group. Combat is not about honor. Combat is not about fairness. Combat is about coming home to the people who need you alive. Everything else is luxury. Vexhi watched from the observation booth as Hana demonstrated close-quarters combat techniques. Her movements were efficient and brutal. Where other species focused on strength or speed, humans focused on ending fights quickly using whatever worked. She is teaching them to fight without rules, observed General Horth through his mechanical voice box. No, said Captain Kim, who had joined them to watch the training. She is teaching them that the Devourers have no rules. Fighting with honor against an enemy that has none is suicide. On the training floor, Hana showed the alien recruits how to use improvised weapons. A broken piece of metal became a stabbing tool. A communication device became an explosive. Even a standard meal ration could be turned into a choking agent. A Talarian soldier raised 2 of his forearms. Sergeant, these techniques seem uncivilized. Hana stopped moving. The entire room went quiet. When she spoke, her voice was deadly calm. Soldier, what is your name? Krelhan of the Northern Territories. Krelhan, have you ever watched someone you love die slowly? The Talarian's arms moved in confusion. No, Sergeant. Have you ever had to choose between saving one person or saving 10? No, Sergeant. Have you ever killed someone with your bare hands because you ran out of ammunition and they were trying to kill your friends? No, Sergeant, Hana nodded. Then do not talk to me about civilization. Civilization is what we are fighting to protect. What I'm teaching you is what keeps civilization alive when monsters come to destroy it. The training continued with weapons practice. Human instructors showed alien recruits how to maintain and modify their equipment. More importantly, they showed them how to keep fighting when their equipment failed. Vexhai watched Corporal Shin Minho teach a mixed group about battlefield scavenging. Your fancy energy weapon is useless when its power cell dies, Minho explained. But the enemy's weapon might still work. Their ammunition might fit your backup weapon. Even their dead bodies can provide cover or camouflage. A mechanical union recruit's optical sensors blinked rapidly. Corporal, are you suggesting we use dead bodies as tools? Minho's expression did not change. I am telling you that when you are fighting for your life, everything is a tool. The ground you stand on, the air you breathe, your dead enemies, your dead friends, everything. The mechanical being recoiled. That is horrible. Yes, Minho agreed. War is horrible. The Devourers are counting on you being too civilized to do horrible things. That is how they win. Later that day, Vexhai attended a tactical planning session with human officers. Major Jiang Suyong stood before a holographic map of a planetary system under Devourer attack. The enemy always follows the same pattern, she explained. They consume the outer worlds first, absorbing local knowledge and resources. Then they move to more populated areas. We can use this pattern against them. She highlighted several locations on the map. We will establish forward bases here, here, and here. Each base will have enough supplies for 30 days of combat. Each base will also have enough explosives to completely destroy itself if overrun. General Horth's mechanical head tilted. Major, that seems wasteful. Those bases will be expensive to build. General, what is more expensive? Building bases we might have to destroy, or letting the Devourers capture intact bases with all their resources and intelligence? The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans were planning for defeat from the beginning. This is your strategy? Asked Ambassador Kreltos. Plan to lose? Captain Kim answered. Ambassador, this is our strategy. Plan for everything. Hope for the best. Prepare for the worst and always have a way out. He gestured to the holographic display. Every human battle plan includes contingencies for victory, defeat, and everything in between. We plan what to do if we are cut off from supplies. We plan what to do if our communications fail. We plan what to do if our commanders are killed. We plan what to do if we are surrounded and outnumbered. That seems excessive, said General Horth. No, Kim replied. That is survival. The session continued with discussions of supply chains, communication protocols, and evacuation procedures. At every step, the humans had backup plans for their backup plans. Private Kang Jian demonstrated field engineering techniques. She showed the mixed alien crew how to build defensive fortifications from local materials, how to create communication networks that would function even under heavy electronic interference, how to jury-rig essential equipment from salvaged parts. The enemy will try to cut us off from resupply, she explained while assembling a weapon from spare parts. They will jam our communications. They will destroy our bases. We must be ready to continue fighting even when we are alone. A crystalline engineer raised his arm. Private, why not simply ensure our supply lines remain secure? Jian looked at him with something that might have been pity. Because the enemy gets a vote. They will do everything possible to cut our supply lines. Hoping they fail is not a strategy. As the day ended, Vexhai walked through the barracks area. He could hear conversations in dozens of languages as different species tried to process what they had learned. Many seemed disturbed by human tactics. The crystalline spoke of honor and dignity in warfare. The mechanical union discussed the inefficiency of planning for failure. The other species expressed similar concerns, but Vexhai noticed something else. The younger soldiers from every species seemed to understand better than their elders. Those who had actually seen combat, even minor conflicts, adapted to human doctrine more quickly. It was as if the humans were awakening something that had been sleeping in the other species. Something that their long peace had buried but not destroyed. He found Captain Kim in the observation lounge. staring out at the stars through the reinforced viewport. "Captain," HFY said, "your people are teaching us to fight without honor." Kim turned to look at him. "Commander, we are teaching you to fight to win. Honor is something you can afford after victory. The dead have no use for honor. But surely some things are more important than survival." Kim's expression grew thoughtful. "Yes, some things are worth dying for. That is exactly why we fight so hard to stay alive, so we can protect those things that matter more than our own lives." He looked back out at the stars. "Commander, the Devourers are not coming to test your honor or measure your courage. They are coming to erase you from existence. Every rule of civilized warfare, every code of honor, every principle of fair fighting, none of that will save your people." HFY joined him at the viewport. "Then what will?" "The willingness to become temporarily uncivilized to preserve civilization. The ability to do terrible things for good reasons. The strength to carry the burden of necessary evil so that others do not have to." Kim was quiet for a moment before continuing. "We are not teaching you to be monsters, Commander. We are teaching you to fight monsters. Sometimes the only difference is who you fight for." The alert sirens on Kepler 442b's largest moon began screaming at 0347 hours. HFY rolled out of his sleeping pod and grabbed his equipment as emergency lights bathed the forward operating base in red. "All personnel to battle stations." Major Jang Suyong's voice echoed through the corridors. "This is not a drill." Devourer ships detected approaching the system. HFY ran to the command center, his forearms automatically checking his weapon and communication gear. Around him, beings from a dozen species moved with practiced efficiency. The human training had worked. Everyone knew their role. The command center buzzed with controlled chaos. Holographic displays showed the approaching Devourer fleet. Hundreds of organic ships that looked more grown than built. Their biomechanical forms pulsed with sickly light as they moved through space like a swarm of parasites. "Time to contact?" Major Zhang asked. 47 minutes, replied Lieutenant Choi Minji from her station. "They are moving faster than expected." HFY watched the humans work. The casual friendliness he had grown used to during training was completely gone. These were not the same people who had shared meals and told jokes during off-duty hours. They moved with cold efficiency, speaking in short, clipped sentences. "Sir?" Private Kang Jion called out from the engineering station. "Defensive systems are online. All weapon platforms are charged and ready." "Evacuation routes?" Major Jang asked. "Clear and confirmed," answered Sergeant Lee Do-hyun. "Emergency supplies loaded on all transport vessels." HFY noticed something strange. The humans were already planning their retreat before the battle had even started. The first Devourer ships entered the system's outer boundary. Through the observation ports, they could see distant flashes as automated defense satellites engaged the enemy fleet. "Contact in 30 minutes, Lieutenant Choi announced. Major Jang turned to address the mixed alien and human crew. "Remember your training. Fight smart, not hard. Stay alive. Complete your missions and trust your teammates." The next few minutes passed intense preparation. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Final communications were sent to other bases. Emergency procedures were reviewed one last time. Then the Devourers arrived. The first wave hit their position like a living tsunami. The organic ships released thousands of smaller creatures that moved like a cross between insects and nightmares. They had too many legs, too many eyes, and feeding appendages that dripped with digestive enzymes. "Open fire," Major Jang commanded. The defensive platforms erupted in coordinated violence. Energy beams and projectile weapons tore through the attacking swarm. Explosions lit up the moon's thin atmosphere as Devourer creatures died by the hundreds. But more kept coming. HFY found himself fighting alongside Specialist Oh Seon-woo in one of the outer defensive positions. The human soldier fired with mechanical precision, each shot taking down an enemy creature. But instead of just killing them, Seon-woo was doing something else. "What are you doing?" HFY shouted over the sound of weapons fire. "Taking samples," Seon-woo replied calmly, grabbing pieces of dead Devourer with specialized tools. Even in the middle of combat, he was studying the enemy. A group of Devourers broke through the outer perimeter. HFY watched in fascination and horror as human soldiers adapted their tactics instantly. When their energy weapons overheated, they switched to captured bioweapons torn from dead enemies. When those ran out of ammunition, they used improvised explosives. Medic Han Jisoo set up a field treatment station in the command bunker, but unlike the medical officers from other species, She was not just treating wounds. She was performing quick dissections on captured devourer specimens, identifying weak points and vulnerabilities while patching up injured soldiers. "The neural cluster is here," she called out, pointing to a section of a dead creature's anatomy. "A precise strike to this location causes immediate paralysis." The information was immediately transmitted to all fighting positions. Within minutes, the alien soldiers were targeting the newly identified weak spots. The tide of battle began to shift. But HFY was beginning to understand something disturbing about human warfare. They did not just fight their enemies, they learned from them. Even while under attack, they were collecting intelligence, adapting their tactics, and improving their effectiveness. A new alarm sounded. "Breach in Sector 7, came Lieutenant Choi's voice. "Multiple devourers inside the perimeter." HFY ran toward Sector 7 with a mixed team of aliens and humans. What they found there would stay with him forever. A crystalline soldier named Veltar had been caught by a group of devourers. The feeding process had already begun. Organic tubes were inserted into his crystal body, and neural connectors pulsed with stolen thoughts and memories. Veltar was still conscious, still screaming. The alien soldiers froze in horror. In their cultures, they would try to rescue him. They would attempt to save their comrade regardless of the cost or the likelihood of success. The humans did not hesitate. Corporal Shin Minho raised his plasma rifle and fired a single shot. Veltar's scream stopped instantly as the energy beam ended his suffering. "No," shouted Stelvar, the crystalline warrior. "We could have saved him." Minho turned to face him, his expression hard. "No, we could not. The feeding process cannot be reversed. Attempting rescue would have cost more lives and given the devourers more information about our tactics. But he was our friend." "Yes," Minho replied. "That is why I killed him quickly instead of letting him suffer." The other aliens stared in shock. But HFY was beginning to understand. The humans did not make this decision out of cruelty. They made it out of a terrible kind of mercy. The battle continued for hours. The human tactics proved effective, but the cost was enormous. Casualties mounted on both sides. The devourers kept adapting to their defenses, and the humans kept adapting in return. It became a deadly dance of evolution and counter-evolution, with both sides learning and changing their strategies in real time. "Sir," Lieutenant Choi called out during a brief lull in the fighting. Long-range sensors detect a second devourer wave approaching, much larger than the first. Major Jiang studied the tactical display. Even HFY could see that their position would not survive another assault of that size. "Begin Evacuation Protocol 7, the Major commanded. "Sir?" asked a mechanical union officer. "Should we not continue fighting?" Major Jiang looked at him with something approaching pity. "Officer, there is no shame in tactical retreat. The objective is not to hold this position. The objective is to survive and continue fighting." The evacuation began immediately, but this was not a panicked retreat. This was a planned, organized withdrawal that the humans had rehearsed dozens of times. HFY watched in amazement as human soldiers systematically destroyed everything that could be useful to the enemy. Equipment that could not be moved was sabotaged. Intelligence files were wiped. Even the wounded who could not be transported were. He could not bring himself to finish the thought. "Commander." Sergeant Lee appeared beside him. "Your transport leaves in 5 minutes. What about the base?" Lee smiled grimly. "The base will not be here when the next wave arrives." As their evacuation ship lifted off, HFY looked back at the base they had defended so hard. It was still intact, still functional. Then it disappeared in a flash of nuclear fire. "The base was rigged from the beginning," Lee explained, seeing his expression. "We always planned for the possibility that it might fall." HFY realized with growing horror that the humans had been prepared to destroy everything they had built, everything they had fought for, rather than let it fall into enemy hands. "Do you always plan for defeat?" he asked. Lee's expression was thoughtful. "Commander, we do not plan for defeat. We plan for reality. Sometimes reality means you lose a battle so you can win a war." As they flew away from the burning remains of their base, HFY understood that he had witnessed something far more disturbing than devourer brutality. He had seen human efficiency. He had seen the cold, calculated way his new allies approached warfare. They did not fight like warriors seeking glory. They fought like predators seeking survival, and they were very, very good at it. The transport ship was quiet except for the hum of engines. Around him, Soldiers from various species processed what they had experienced. Many seemed shaken by the human approach to combat, but they were alive. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, they had survived because they had followed human doctrine. Vex-High began to realize that Admiral Park's warning had been literal, not metaphorical. Fighting alongside humans was indeed changing them all into something they had never been before. The question was, would they still recognize themselves when the war was over? The evacuation coordinates were supposed to be safe. Emergency Rally Point Alpha 7 was located in deep space, far from any star system that might attract devourer attention. The combined fleet of survivors from 12 different battles had gathered there to regroup and plan their next move. Vex-High stood in the observation deck of the human cruiser Resilience, watching rescue ships bring in wounded soldiers from the latest series of defeats. 3 more bases had fallen in the past week. Each time the pattern was the same: fight hard, gather intelligence, evacuate before total defeat, and destroy everything useful to the enemy. It was effective. But it was also heartbreaking. "Commander," Colonel Bei Seojun approached from behind. The human officer looked tired but alert. "The senior staff meeting is about to begin." Vex-High followed him to the briefing room. Representatives from the surviving units filled the space: humans, crystallines, Talarians, mechanical union members, and others. Everyone looked exhausted. The long series of fighting retreats had taken its toll on morale. Admiral Park stood at the head of the table, her expression grim. "The situation is worse than we anticipated," she began without preamble. "Intelligence suggests the devourers are adapting to our tactics faster than expected. They are also learning from the bases they have captured." She activated the holographic display, showing the current tactical situation. Red markers indicated devourer-controlled space, which had grown significantly larger. "We have successfully evacuated over 90% of our personnel from overrun positions," she continued. "But we are running out of places to make a stand." General Horth's mechanical voice box crackled with static. "Admiral, perhaps it is time to consider negotiation." The room fell silent. Several alien representatives nodded in agreement. The idea of continuing this costly retreat seemed unbearable. Admiral Park's expression did not change. "General, what exactly would you negotiate with a species that reproduces by consuming other intelligent beings?" "There must be some way to reach an accommodation," insisted Ambassador Kreltos. "Perhaps we could offer them uninhabited worlds to consume instead." "And when those worlds are empty, what then?" asked Captain Kim. "When they have grown stronger and more numerous from consuming those worlds, what will stop them from taking inhabited ones?" The alien representatives shifted uncomfortably. The logic was sound, but the alternative seemed impossible. "The enemy fleet now outnumbers our remaining forces by more than 10 to 1, said Major Jiang. "Conventional tactics will not achieve victory." Demolitions expert Park Hiron spoke, up from her position near the back of the room. "Ma'am, perhaps it is time to discuss unconventional options." Admiral Park nodded slowly. "Agreed. Colonel Bei, please brief everyone on Operation Scorched Earth." Colonel Bei activated a new display. What Vex-High saw made his blood run cold. "Operation Scorched Earth is our final contingency plan," Bei explained. "If we cannot defeat the devourers through normal warfare, we will deny them the resources they need to continue expanding." The display showed star maps with marked systems. Dozens of them. "We will systematically destroy every world, every space station, every resource depot in the path of the devourer advance," Bei continued. "We will leave them nothing but empty space and dead rock." The alien representatives erupted in protest. "You cannot be serious," shouted General Horth. "Those systems contain billions of innocent lives." "We would evacuate populated worlds first," Colonel Bei replied calmly. "But yes, we would destroy them to deny them to the enemy." Ambassador Kreltos stood up, his crystal body reflecting the harsh light of the briefing room. "This is madness. You are talking about destroying entire civilizations to slow down an enemy that might eventually be defeated through other means." "What other means?" asked Captain Kim. "Negotiation?" "They do not negotiate. Superior technology. They adapt to our weapons faster than we can develop new ones. Greater numbers? They reproduce by consuming us." The argument continued for hours. The alien representatives could not accept the human proposal. It violated every principle of civilized warfare they had ever known. But Vexhai found himself thinking about the battles they had fought. The humans had been right about everything else. Their tactics had worked. Their strategies had kept them alive when conventional approaches would have meant total defeat. There is another option, Admiral Park said quietly, cutting through the arguments. Operation Prometheus. The room fell silent again. Even the other human officers looked surprised. Admiral, Colonel Bay said carefully, Prometheus is still theoretical. The situation calls for theoretical solutions, Park replied. She looked around the room, meeting each person's gaze. What I am about to tell you must not leave this room. Humanity has been developing psychological warfare techniques, specifically for hive mind species. She activated another display, this one showing brain scans and neural activity patterns. The devourers consume their prey to absorb knowledge and memories. This gives them access to our tactics, our technology, and our strategic thinking. It is their greatest advantage. Vexhai leaned forward, intrigued despite his growing unease. But it may also be their greatest weakness, Park continued. Human minds contain certain concepts that appear to be incompatible with hive mind psychology. What kind of concepts? Asked General Horth. Individualism, free will, the ability to sacrifice oneself for others, the concept of hope in hopeless situations. Park paused. When devourers consume humans, they do not just absorb our knowledge. They absorb these concepts as well. The implications began to sink in around the room. You want to use our own people as weapons, Ambassador Kreltos said in horror. We want to volunteer, corrected Master Sergeant Lim Junwoo, speaking for the first time. Operation Prometheus calls for volunteers to allow themselves to be captured and partially consumed, while carrying specific psychological patterns designed to disrupt hive mind cohesion. Vexhai stared at the human sergeant. You are talking about letting the enemy eat your minds while you try to poison their thoughts. Yes, Junwoo replied simply. The alien representatives were speechless. The concept was so alien to their way of thinking that they could barely process it. How do you know it will work? Vexhai asked. Admiral Park activated another display showing experimental data. We have tested it on smaller hive mind species. The results were significant. When a hive mind tries to process human concepts like individual sacrifice for the greater good, it experiences something like cognitive dissonance. The unity breaks down. But the volunteers would be lost forever, said General Horth. Some would, Park admitted. Others might survive if we can disrupt the hive mind quickly enough. But yes, it is essentially a suicide mission. The room was quiet for a long moment. How many volunteers would you need? Vexhai asked. For a full-scale operation against the entire devourer hive mind? Thousands, possibly tens of thousands. And you have people willing to do this? Park's smile was sad but proud. Commander, the sign-up list already contains more names than we need. We had to stop taking volunteers because too many people wanted to participate. Vexhai felt something cold settle in his stomach. He was beginning to understand what Admiral Park had meant about not recognizing themselves after fighting alongside humans. These beings did not just fight to win. They were willing to sacrifice their own minds, their own identities to protect others. They would literally give up everything that made them who they were if it meant saving people they had never met. It was the most horrible and most beautiful thing he had ever heard. There is one more thing, Park said quietly. For Operation Prometheus to work, we need the cooperation of other species. The psychological warfare techniques work best when combined with conventional assault. We would need the entire remaining fleet to coordinate with the volunteer missions. She looked around the room again. We are asking you to bet everything on a plan that has never been tested on this scale. Using tactics that violate every rule of civilized warfare, led by a species that most of you have known for less than a year. The silence stretched on for minutes. Finally, Vexhai spoke. Admiral, if this plan fails, what happens to us? Total extinction, Park replied without hesitation. The devourers will consume every intelligent species in the galaxy. And if it succeeds, we might win. But the people who volunteer for Prometheus missions will never be the same. Some will die. Others will carry the scars of having their minds partially consumed for the rest of their lives. Vexhai looked around the room at his fellow officers. He could see the same struggle on every face. The human plan was terrible. It was also the only plan that might actually work. How long do we have to decide? He asked. Admiral Park checked her chronometer. The next major Devourer offensive begins in 72 hours. After that, we may not have enough ships left to attempt any coordinated action. The meeting broke up without a decision. But Vex-High could see that everyone was thinking about it. He spent the next few hours walking through the ship, observing the humans preparing for what might be their final battle. They showed no fear, no hesitation. They simply did their jobs with quiet competence. But more than that, they showed something he was only beginning to understand. They showed love. Love for each other, for the species they were fighting to protect, for the future they were trying to preserve. It was that love that made them. The decision came 18 hours later. Vex-High stood in the command center of the human flagship Indomitable, watching the largest fleet in galactic history prepare for what everyone knew would be the final battle. Every surviving ship from the Galactic Defense Coalition had gathered at the coordinates Admiral Park had provided. Crystalline cruisers hung in space next to Talarian destroyers and mechanical Union dreadnoughts. Human vessels, smaller but somehow more threatening, moved between them like predators among a herd. Final count, Admiral, reported Fleet Admiral Song Mirai from her position at the tactical station. 2,647 ships of various classes. Approximately 4 million personnel. Admiral Park nodded grimly. And the enemy? Long-range scouts report over 30,000 Devourer vessels approaching the Xerian system. Best estimate is 40 million individual creatures. The numbers were staggering. Even with the combined fleets of every species in the galaxy, they were outnumbered more than 10 to 1. Operation Prometheus volunteers? Park asked. All prepared and ready, answered Commander Nam De-sung, the operations coordinator. We have 8,000 volunteers from the human fleet and... He paused, consulting his display. 3,000 volunteers from allied species. Vex-High felt his breathing apparatus work harder. 11,000 beings were about to voluntarily let themselves be captured and consumed by the enemy, hoping to poison the hive mind from within. The allied volunteers, Admiral Park said carefully. Do they fully understand what they are volunteering for? Yes, ma'am, Nam replied. We made sure every non-human volunteer understood that this is not a rescue mission. They will be consumed. Some might survive if we can disrupt the hive mind quickly enough, but most will die. Admiral Park turned to look at the alien representatives who had chosen to remain on the human flagship for the battle. I must ask again, are you certain about this decision? Ambassador Krelto stepped forward, his crystal body catching the harsh light of the command center. Admiral, 3 days ago my people would have called this plan insane. But we have watched humans fight. We have learned from human tactics. We have seen what becomes necessary when facing true evil. He gestured to the tactical display showing the approaching Devourer swarm. Those creatures destroyed my homeworld 2 months ago. They consumed 12 billion of my people, including my mate and offspring. If there is even a small chance that this plan might prevent that from happening to others, then yes, I am certain. General Horth's mechanical voice box buzzed with static as he spoke. The Mechanical Union has calculated the probabilities. Conventional warfare has a 0% chance of success. Operation Prometheus has a 17% chance of success. 17% is greater than 0. Vex-High found himself speaking without conscious thought. The Talarian Defense Corps will participate fully in the operation. Admiral Park studied his face. Commander, you understand that this means some of your people will volunteer for consumption missions? Yes, Vex-High replied. I understand. And yes, we have volunteers. The truth was more complicated. When Vex-High had explained Operation Prometheus to his surviving troops, the response had been immediate and overwhelming. Too many had volunteered. He had been forced to hold a lottery to determine who would be allowed to participate in the suicide missions. It was something he never would have imagined possible among his people before the war began. All right, Admiral Park said. Final briefing in 1 hour. All senior officers to report to Briefing Room Alpha. The next hour passed quickly. Final preparations were completed across the fleet. Weapons were charged, shields were tested, and communication networks were synchronized. But the most important preparations were psychological. In the briefing room, Admiral Park stood before a holographic display showing the Devourer home system. The enemy fleet was massive beyond comprehension, a living cloud of organic ships that stretched across millions of kilometers of space. The plan is simple in concept, complex in execution, Park began. Phase 1. Our main fleet will engage the Devourer forces in conventional combat, drawing their attention and forcing them to commit their reserves. She highlighted several areas on the display. Phase 2. Volunteer ships will allow themselves to be captured at predetermined points. The volunteers aboard these ships will be consumed by Devourers, but they will be carrying specific psychological patterns designed to disrupt hive mind unity. How long before we know if the psychological warfare is working? Asked General Horth. Initial effects should be visible within 30 minutes of first consumption, replied Dr. Ryu Jaewan, the human psychologist who had designed the mental viruses. Full hive mind disruption, if it occurs, should happen within 2 hours. And if it does not work? Asked Ambassador Kreltos. Then we all die, Park replied simply. But we die fighting, and we deny the Devourers the resources of our home worlds. The briefing continued with technical details and coordination protocols, but Vexhai found his attention drawn to the human volunteers. They sat quietly, listening to plans for their own consumption and possible death with calm professionalism. One of them was pilot Cha Sung-min, a young man who had shared stories about his family during training exercises. Another was communications specialist Hong Nyan, whose brother commanded one of the ships in the main fleet. They showed no fear, no hesitation. They had made their choice and accepted the consequences. Final question, Admiral Park said. Does anyone wish to change their decision about participating in this operation? Silence filled the room. Very well. All ships to battle stations. Operation Prometheus begins in 6 hours. The next few hours were the longest of Vexahai's life. He found himself walking through different sections of the ship, observing the preparations. In the medical bay, Dr. Han Jisoo prepared equipment for treating survivors of hive mind consumption, if there were any. In the engineering sections, teams led by Chief Engineer Park Hyeran rigged every system with self-destruct charges just in case. But it was the volunteer preparation areas that affected him most deeply. He watched as human soldiers recorded final messages for their families, knowing they would probably never be seen again. They wrote letters, shared memories, and said goodbye to friends, yet there was no despair. If anything, there was a strange sense of peace about them. "Commander," a voice said behind him. He turned to see pilot Cha Sung-min approaching. "Pilot, should you not be preparing for the mission?" Sung-min smiled. "I am prepared, sir. I wanted to ask you something. What is it? After the war, if we win, will you tell people what happened here? Will you tell them that we tried?" Vexhai felt his forearms tremble slightly. "Of course. But why ask me?" "Because you have seen us fight. You understand what this means. Many of our own people think we are crazy for attempting this plan." "Are you?" Vexhai asked. "Crazy, I mean." Sungmin considered the question seriously. "Maybe, but crazy in a good way, I think. Crazy enough to believe that hope is more powerful than fear. Crazy enough to think that love is stronger than hate." He looked out through a viewport at the massive enemy fleet approaching in the distance. Those creatures consume everything in their path because they are afraid. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of not having enough. Afraid of being different. And humans are not afraid. "Oh, we are terrified," Sungmin replied. "But we do not let fear make our decisions for us." An hour later, the battle began. The combined galactic fleet met the Devourer swarm at the edge of the Zirian system. The initial exchange of fire lit up space like a miniature star. Energy beams, projectile weapons, and exotic matter missiles crossed the void in both directions. Vexhai watched from the command center as the battle unfolded. The Alliance fleet fought with desperate courage, using every tactic the humans had taught them. Ships moved in coordinated formations, covering each other's retreats and maximizing their firepower. But the enemy was simply too numerous. For every Devourer ship destroyed, 2 more took its place. "Begin Phase 2, Admiral Park commanded. Across the battlefield, volunteer ships broke formation and allowed themselves to be captured. Vexhai watched on the tactical display as red icons surrounded blue ones, indicating successful captures. Then the consumption began. Through communication links, they could hear the final transmissions from the volunteer ships. Voices remained calm and professional. Even as Devourer feeding tubes penetrated their hulls and neural, connectors began the process of extracting knowledge and memories. "This is Transport 7. came the voice of communications specialist Hong Nayeon. Consumption process has begun. Mental barriers are holding. Beginning psychological warfare protocols. Her voice was interrupted by static, then screaming, then silence. Similar reports came from other volunteer ships. Brave beings from multiple species allowed themselves to be consumed while trying to plant viruses in the collective devourer mind. 20 minutes passed. 30. 40. Admiral, Dr. Ryu called out from his station. I am detecting anomalous behavior in several devourer formations. On the tactical display, some of the enemy ships had stopped moving in their characteristic swarm patterns. A few were actually attacking other due.